Seoul and Washington have struck a trade deal, both sides agreeing to cut tariffs on U.S. imports from South Korea to 15%. Now, that's less than the 25% U.S. President Donald Trump had threatened to impose. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung called the deal a major diplomatic achievement for the export-driven economy.
Imagine a single trade decision shaking the foundations of a $50 billion global steel market. China's sudden move to slap massive tariffs on stainless steel imports from 30 countries isn't just about economics. It's a bold signal that the rules of international trade are changing. Why is China targeting these countries now? What does it mean for industries, jobs, and economies worldwide?
Meanwhile, Taiwan says it has reached a certain consensus with the U.S., including non-tariff trade barriers. But Taipei has yet to provide details on the agreed levy. Japan is resting easy after striking a deal with its ally, the U.S. Now, Tokyo has seen its tariff rate cut to 15% from 25% last week. The agreement is expected to reduce the tariff impact on the Japanese auto sector. But analysts say there are still reasons for caution, as higher U.S. levies will still weigh on the country's exports.
In recent months, China has taken a significant step in global trade by introducing anti-dumping duties on stainless steel products imported from 30 different countries. This move stands out not only because of the number of countries involved, but also due to the unusually high tariffs imposed, with some reaching as high as 103.1%. These tariffs are set to be in place for up to 5 years, marking a long-term commitment by China to defend its domestic stainless steel industry. Anti-dumping duties are trade measures used by countries to protect their domestic industries from foreign companies selling products at artificially low prices, a practice known as dumping. Dumping can harm local manufacturers by undercutting prices and destabilizing the market. By imposing these duties, China aims to level the playing field for its domestic producers and discourage unfair pricing tactics from foreign exporters.
South Koreans woke up Thursday morning to the news that Seoul and Washington had reached a deal, allowing South Korea's products, including auto exports, to face a 15% tariff, down from 25%. The presidential office was quick to give a media briefing in the morning. It said the most remarkable outcome of the deal was a shipbuilding cooperation package.
What makes China's latest tariffs particularly notable is the list of countries affected. The tariffs target a wide range of nations across the globe, including members of the European Union, the United Kingdom, South Korea, Indonesia, and several others. Interestingly, the United States is not included in this list, which has led to speculation about the political and strategic considerations behind China's decision. The absence of the U.S. suggests that China might be using these tariffs as a calculated message within the broader context of ongoing trade negotiations and global economic diplomacy.
Biggest economy was firmly in Trump's trade crosshairs from the moment he took office. The two sides agreed in May to pause some tariffs, with Washington cutting the extra tariffs it imposed on Chinese imports to 30% from 145%. Under the truce, China slashed its duties on U.S. imports from 125% to 10%. A Xinhua commentary says that China has been sincere in consultations with the U.S., but it says some structural problems in China-U.S. trade relations cannot be solved overnight.
The duties focus on two main product categories: stainless steel billets and hot-rolled coils. These are essential raw materials widely used in many industrial and manufacturing processes, including construction, automotive production, and machinery. Because of their importance, these steel products are heavily traded in international markets, making them a critical segment of global commerce. China has long been the world's largest producer of stainless steel, a position it has steadily strengthened over the past decade. To understand the significance of China's new trade policy, it helps to look at how its stainless steel industry has evolved. Back in 2018, China produced roughly 26 million tons of stainless steel. This was already more than the combined output of Europe and the United States. But the growth did not stop there. By 2024, China's production had increased by over 51%, reaching nearly 39.44 million tons. This massive output confirms China's status as a dominant player in stainless steel manufacturing, both in terms of quantity and industrial capacity. However, producing a large volume of steel does not necessarily mean China leads in all areas of technology. While Chinese manufacturers are very competitive when it comes to standard stainless steel products, they still lag behind in some of the more specialized, high-tech segments. Products like ultra-thin stainless steel foil or high-strength spring steel require sophisticated smelting techniques and extremely precise quality control. These are areas where traditional steel producers in Europe and South Korea maintain a technological advantage. This gap means that China continues to import certain types of stainless steel that require advanced manufacturing capabilities. For example, in 2018, the total stainless steel production capacity in Europe was about 7.385 million tons. However, despite this capacity, actual exports to China were relatively low, less than 100,000 tons. A key reason for this was pricing. At the time, the price for stainless steel billets in China ranged between 2,000 and 3,000 yuan per ton, while European producers typically charged about 800 yen more per ton. This significant price difference made it more economical for Chinese buyers to source steel domestically rather than importing from Europe, reducing the competitiveness of European steel exports in the Chinese market. Facing this challenge, European manufacturers realized they needed to rethink their approach to China. By 2019, many companies had shifted their focus away from China's wealthier first-tier cities, where brand reputation and high-quality standards were crucial, towards the third and fourth-tier cities, and even county-level markets. These areas tend to be more price-sensitive, offering an opportunity for European firms to sell competitively priced products tailored to local demand. This new strategy involved launching product lines that balanced quality with affordability. European companies aim to position themselves as providers of reliable steel at lower prices, making their products accessible to a broader segment of the Chinese market. This approach was supported by their home governments through various forms of assistance, including research subsidies and tax breaks, which helped reduce operational costs and allowed these firms to compete more aggressively. The results were significant. Market data indicated that stainless steel imports from the European Union into China were up to 35% cheaper than domestic products. This price advantage led to a jump in the EU's market share in China, increasing from 12% to 23%. The increased competition put considerable pressure on Chinese steel producers, squeezing their profit margins by more than 5 percentage points. Some smaller Chinese steel companies, unable to cope with these financial pressures and declining demand, were forced to shut down. South Korean companies soon followed a similar path, targeting China's low-end market with aggressive pricing strategies aimed at undercutting domestic producers. This intensified competition further disrupted the Chinese steel industry. Operating rates for some Chinese producers dropped by as much as 15%, and more than 20,000 steel industry jobs were lost as a result. Other countries, including Japan and India, also joined in by adopting similar tactics. They launched full-scale efforts to gain market share in China by flooding the market with inexpensive stainless steel products. However, these actions did not go unnoticed by Chinese authorities. After conducting several investigations, China concluded that steel exporters from these countries were dumping products at unfairly low prices, intending to destabilize the local market and gain control. In response, in July 2019, China announced anti-dumping duties on stainless steel billets and hot-rolled coils imported from 4 major sources: the European Union, Japan, South Korea, and Indonesia. The tariff rates imposed were significant: 43% for the EU, 29% for Japan, a staggering 103% for South Korea, and 20% for Indonesia. These measures were designed to last for 5 years and included provisions for price commitments and other regulations aimed at stabilizing China's domestic steel market. Japan challenged China's decision by bringing the case to the World Trade Organization's dispute resolution system. After a lengthy process, the WTO ruled in favor of Japan, stating that China's anti-dumping measures did not fully comply with international trade rules. Although this outcome was disappointing for China, it was not entirely unexpected. At the time, many in China believed the WTO panels were influenced by European and American interests, leading to a perception of bias in cases involving Chinese trade policies. Despite this ruling, China's actions sent a clear message. It signaled a shift away from its previous, more cautious approach to international trade disputes, demonstrating a willingness to act decisively to protect its industries from what it sees as unfair competition. This stance would set the stage for the even broader and more aggressive trade measures China would later adopt. Following the initial round of anti-dumping duties in 2019, the global stainless steel market saw significant shifts. Countries affected by China's tariffs quickly adjusted their strategies in response to both the tariffs and China's growing determination to protect its domestic industry. Japan's challenge at the World Trade Organization, WTO, set a precedent, encouraging other nations to adopt aggressive pricing tactics to maintain or increase their market share in China despite rising trade barriers. Many steel exporters saw flooding the Chinese market with lower-priced products as the fastest way to regain lost ground. The logic was simple. If Chinese buyers could not be won over by quality alone, then undercutting domestic prices with cheaper imports could force Chinese producers to reduce their prices or lose market share. This strategy proved partially successful for some countries, but it also increased tensions between China and its trading partners. China, however, was not prepared to remain passive in the face of what it viewed as ongoing attempts to destabilize its steel industry. In July, China escalated its response by announcing a sweeping new round of anti-dumping tariffs on stainless steel products imported from 30 countries. These duties were to be enforced immediately and would remain in place for 5 years. The scale and scope of this move were unprecedented, highlighting China's readiness to take bold and comprehensive action to protect its strategic industries. The list of affected countries was extensive. It included the United Kingdom, Indonesia, South Korea, and all 27 member states of the European Union. The tariffs imposed were steep. For most European nations and the UK, China applied a uniform rate of 43%. Indonesian exporters faced a 20% tariff. South Korea, however, experienced the most severe penalties, with some companies subjected to anti-dumping duties as high as 103.1%. The situation for South Korean steel producers was particularly complex. One major South Korean company, POSCO, anticipated the harsher tariffs and proactively appealed to Chinese authorities for a separate review based on its actual pricing practices. Following a detailed investigation, China concluded that POSCO's pricing did not threaten its domestic industry and granted the company a significantly reduced tariff of 23.1%. Other South Korean companies, however, did not take similar steps and were hit with the full brunt of the tariffs. For many, the 103.1% duty effectively shut them out of the Chinese market. This level of tariff is often enough to eliminate any hope of profitable exports, as the additional cost doubles the price for Chinese buyers, making imports from these companies economically unfeasible. China's justification for these tariffs was based on solid evidence gathered during investigations. Chinese officials claimed that exporters from these 30 countries engaged in unfair trade practices by selling stainless steel products at artificially low prices, intentionally undermining Chinese producers and destabilizing the domestic market. From China's perspective, these duties were not merely punitive, but necessary to maintain a fair and stable trading environment. This move also reflects a broader shift in China's approach to global trade. In the past, China was often seen as a more passive player, cautious about taking aggressive actions that could provoke retaliation or disrupt diplomatic relations. Today, however, China is emerging as a more assertive and confident actor on the international stage. It wields considerable influence and is willing to use trade policy as a tool to defend its economic interests robustly. China's announcement of anti-dumping duties sparked immediate ripple effects across the global steel market, particularly in Europe. Germany, as Europe's largest economy and a key player in global steel production, quickly felt the impact. Germany's stainless steel industry is vital to its manufacturing sector, producing materials that are used domestically and exported worldwide, including to China. In November 2023, Germany produced 2.9 million tons of steel, an increase of 8.6% compared to the previous year. In 2024, Germany exported roughly 120,000 tons of stainless steel to China, valued at more than $600 million. With the new 43% tariff in place, German exporters face the prospect of losing over a quarter of their market share in China. France, another major steel producer in Europe, was similarly affected. In 2024, French companies shipped approximately 50,000 tons of stainless steel to China, worth around $60 million. If these exports were classified under the EU's alleged dumping practices, they would also be subject to the same 43% tariff. Such a significant tariff not only cuts into profit margins, but also threatens the overall stability of the supply chain for these manufacturers. The situation in South Korea, as mentioned, was even more severe. Steel production in South Korea is more than just an industrial sector. It forms a critical part of the nation's economic foundation. The steel industry supports vital sectors such as shipbuilding and automotive manufacturing, which are major contributors to South Korea's economy. POSCO, the country's largest steelmaker, alongside Hyundai Steel, has dominated the domestic and international markets for decades. These two companies together produce tens of millions of tons of steel annually. POSCO alone supplies over 26 million tons of steel to more than 60 countries, while Hyundai Steel's capacity exceeds 24 million tons per year. In the past, South Korea's total annual steel production reached nearly 75 million tons, rivaling the output of multiple European countries combined. However, this dominance has been challenged in recent years. China has rapidly increased its production in high-grade and specialized steel categories, such as cast steel, alloy plates, high-strength steel, and specialty metals. Once heavily reliant on imports for these products, China has developed its domestic manufacturing capabilities, closing the quality gap with traditional leaders like Japan and South Korea. In many cases, Chinese products now match or exceed the quality of their foreign counterparts, while often offering more competitive pricing. This shift has altered the global steel landscape dramatically. Chinese-made steel products are no longer seen as mere alternatives, but as direct competitors threatening the market share of established foreign producers. As a result, South Korea's steel exports have been declining since mid-2022. Data from September 2022 shows steel exports fell by over 21% compared to the previous year. This downward trend has persisted, with only minor recoveries in certain months. South Korea faces additional challenges beyond China's tariffs. The United States, under the Trump administration, imposed a 25% tariff on imported steel and aluminum, a policy that continues to affect South Korean exporters. In March 2023, South Korea's steel exports to the U.S. fell by nearly 19% in value, with the volume dropping by about 15%. When considering China's anti-dumping tariffs alongside these challenges, the situation becomes increasingly difficult for South Korean steel producers. With a 103.1% tariff in place, many companies find themselves priced out of the Chinese market entirely. To put this into perspective, imagine a South Korean steel company selling 1 ton of stainless steel to China for 15,000 yuan. With the tariff doubling that cost, the final price would be 30,000 yuan per ton. This pricing makes it virtually impossible to compete with domestic producers or suppliers from countries with lower tariffs. While there is a possibility that future negotiations or policy changes could reduce these tariffs, the damage to South Korea's market position in China is likely long-lasting. The steel producers that once enjoyed strong sales in China may struggle to regain their foothold, marking a significant shift in the global trade balance. China's assertive stance sends a clear message. It is no longer willing to tolerate what it views as systematic dumping or unfair trade practices. The country is prepared to defend its industries aggressively, using tariffs and other trade tools as necessary. This new phase of trade relations has profound implications not just for steel manufacturers, but for the broader global economy. It highlights the increasingly complex and competitive nature of international trade, where geopolitical considerations, industrial capacity, and pricing strategies all play critical roles. The changes in China's trade policy illustrate how the global steel market is evolving, with emerging economic powers like China taking a more proactive role in shaping the rules and dynamics of trade. For other countries, this means adapting to a more competitive environment where traditional advantages in technology or production scale may no longer guarantee market success. As the world adjusts to these developments, governments, companies, and industries must navigate new challenges and opportunities in an increasingly interconnected but also contentious global economy. The recent enforcement of anti-dumping duties by China has forced affected countries and companies to reconsider their strategic positions and explore new avenues to safeguard their interests. These tariffs, particularly the steep ones levied on stainless steel imports from South Korea, the European Union, and other countries, have not only disrupted trade flows, but have also prompted debates over future policy directions and international cooperation. One of the immediate consequences of China's tariffs has been a tangible reduction in stainless steel imports from affected countries. For instance, European exporters, who once relied heavily on China's growing market for their stainless steel products, now face shrinking volumes and a growing backlog of unsold goods. In Germany, companies that had invested heavily in expanding stainless steel production are reevaluating their export strategies, seeking alternative markets or adjusting production to focus on domestic and regional demand. For some manufacturers, the tariffs have been a wake-up call to improve competitiveness beyond price. With China intensifying its protection of domestic steelmakers, foreign suppliers are increasingly pushed to focus on innovation, quality improvements, and customized product offerings rather than attempting to compete on cost alone. European steelmakers, for example, have begun investing in research and development to create higher-grade alloys or develop new steel products tailored for specialized industries such as aerospace, automotive, and renewable energy. Similarly, South Korean producers have had to adapt to a challenging export environment. With the most severe tariffs in place, many smaller South Korean companies are struggling to maintain their market presence in China. This has led some firms to diversify their export destinations, focusing on Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and even North America. However, this diversification is not without obstacles. Trade barriers, logistical challenges, and established local competitors often limit the potential gains from such shifts. At a government level, affected countries have been actively engaging in diplomatic efforts to resolve these trade tensions. The European Union, for example, has called for dialogue with Chinese authorities, seeking a reassessment of the tariffs under World Trade Organization (WTO) frameworks. EU officials argue that while protecting domestic industries is a legitimate concern, the scale and scope of China's anti-dumping duties may violate international trade rules and create unnecessary barriers to fair competition. South Korea has also pursued formal channels at the WTO, filing complaints to challenge the legality of China's tariffs. The South Korean government argues that China's investigation processes were flawed, with insufficient transparency and inconsistent application of anti-dumping measures. Such disputes highlight the ongoing difficulties in enforcing global trade rules in an era of rising economic nationalism and protectionism. Beyond formal disputes, the situation has prompted a broader discussion on how countries can better coordinate to address the challenges posed by dumping and unfair trade practices. Many experts point out that unilateral measures, such as imposing tariffs, often lead to retaliatory actions and a spiral of trade restrictions that ultimately harm all parties involved. One possible solution gaining traction is enhanced multilateral cooperation through international institutions like the WTO. Strengthening the enforcement of trade rules, improving dispute resolution mechanisms, and increasing transparency in investigations could help prevent situations where countries feel compelled to take extreme measures like high tariffs. Another approach is the pursuit of bilateral or regional trade agreements that include robust provisions to address dumping and subsidies. These agreements can create clearer standards and faster resolution processes, reducing uncertainty for exporters and importers alike. In the meantime, companies are looking inward to improve operational efficiency and resilience. Supply chain diversification is a major trend, with firms seeking to reduce dependence on any single market. This includes investing in local production facilities closer to key markets, adopting flexible manufacturing processes, and building strategic reserves of raw materials. For example, some European steel companies have announced plans to expand their production capacity within the EU to serve local demand directly. This strategy aims to reduce vulnerability to foreign tariffs and logistical disruptions while supporting regional economies. Similarly, South Korean steelmakers are exploring partnerships and joint ventures in Southeast Asia to gain footholds in emerging markets. These collaborations not only help bypass tariff barriers, but also provide access to local expertise and customer networks. China itself is not standing still in this evolving landscape. Alongside protecting its domestic steel industry, the country is investing heavily in technology upgrades and environmental improvements. Chinese steelmakers are adopting advanced production techniques, such as electric arc furnace technology, which reduces energy consumption and emissions compared to traditional blast furnaces. This technological shift aligns with China's broader goals of achieving sustainability and reducing pollution in heavy industries. It also positions Chinese producers to compete more effectively in high-quality steel segments, potentially challenging the traditional dominance of countries like Japan, South Korea, and Germany. Environmental standards are becoming an increasingly important factor in the global steel trade. Many buyers, especially in Europe and North America, are now demanding green steel produced with lower carbon footprints. This demand creates both opportunities and challenges for exporters. European steelmakers, with their stringent environmental regulations, may have a competitive edge in producing green steel. However, the higher costs associated with sustainable production could make their products less price competitive in markets where cost remains the primary factor. Chinese producers are making strides to improve their environmental performance, but they face criticism over emissions and resource consumption. The ability to balance sustainability with cost competitiveness will be crucial for China to maintain and expand its position in the global steel market. Looking ahead, the global stainless steel market is expected to remain dynamic and competitive. China's protective measures may inspire other countries to adopt similar tactics, potentially fragmenting global trade flows further. This could lead to the formation of regional trade blocs with distinct rules and standards. At the same time, continued technological innovation and shifting demand patterns, such as increased use of stainless steel in electric vehicles, renewable energy infrastructure, and smart manufacturing, will shape the future of the industry. Companies that can innovate, adapt to regulatory changes, and respond to evolving customer needs are likely to thrive despite the uncertainties. Governments, meanwhile, will need to balance protecting domestic industries with maintaining open markets that encourage competition and innovation. The case of China's anti-dumping tariffs on stainless steel serves as a clear example of how economic interests, trade policy, and global market dynamics intersect in complex ways. It also underscores the importance of dialogue, cooperation, and adherence to international rules in managing trade disputes constructively. In conclusion, the impact of China's tariffs extends beyond immediate trade disruptions. They represent a broader shift in global economic power and strategy, signaling a new era where emerging economies assert their interests more forcefully. Navigating this evolving environment will require flexibility, foresight, and collaboration among all stakeholders in the global steel industry.